Welcome to the ToK Knowledge and Technology Unit. I know you're all very excited, as you should be, because we have a lot of cool stuff to explore. In this unit, we are going to look at communication technologies such as language and writing, printing, and the internet. We're also going to have a good look at your favorite thing these days, artificial intelligence. We'll look at some other disruptive technologies, and finally, we will try to see if it's possible to predict the future. This may seem like a lot to try to handle in one short little unit, but let's start with something nice and familiar. How many of you have ever tried to teach your grandparents how to use their phone? How did that go? I know I have spent many hours trying to get my mom to understand some very simple things on her own devices. So I often wonder, why is it that our grandparents find technology so difficult, whereas our nieces or nephews or our little brothers or sisters find it so very easy? Well, the reason is that these two people come from entirely different worlds. The world has changed dramatically between your grandparents' generation and your niece or nephew's generation. This world is changing, and it's changing faster and faster every year. Let me just give you a look at some graphs to back this up. Here's the world population over the past 2,000 years or so. Here is the amount of information in the world over the past few, thousand years. Here is Moore's law, up in action, processing power increasing. Here's the number of patents that have been filed over the past few centuries, and here's just sort of the growth of technology in general over time, over the past 600 years or so. Do you notice a trend here? Do you notice that curve? That's an exponential curve, children. An exponential growth is showing up absolutely everywhere. Everything is changing so quickly. And on this big exponential curve, we are living at the most exciting, interesting, and terrifying time. We are here at this inflection point, the point where everything starts changing even more rapidly. So this might make you wonder, how the heck did we get here? And where are we going? What will this future look like? We'll put off what the future will look like for now and just focus first on the question of how did we get here, because it's kind of interesting. And it should come as no surprise to you, given the unit that we're studying right now, that how we got here is from a combination of knowledge and technology. And when we look at how that knowledge and technology develops, when we understand where we came from, we can kind of have some idea of how we got here. Let's take a big view here. Homo sapiens sapiens, that's our species, has been around for somewhere between 90 to 160,000 years. Now that might seem like a long time to us. In a geological sense, it's the blink of an eye, and from the universe's progress, it's not even that. But by our standards, that is a massive amount of time. Now, what did we accomplish in that 100 to 150,000 years? Well, we invented fire, we learned how to make pointy sticks, pottery, weaving, sewing, basic agriculture. Some of us figured out the wheel, some of us figured out how to make boats. That's impressive, but that's it. 100 to 150,000 years, that's it. So, that was a lot of time and not much progress. So you might wonder why. Why was this progress so slow? Well, this has to do with how we used to transmit knowledge. The most fundamental way to transmit knowledge is to talk to someone. So here's Grog. Grog has an idea. So what does he do? If he wants to share that idea and pass it on, he has to physically meet with Clog, and he tells Clog the idea, and now Clog's got the idea. Hot damn! We have now passed on information from one person to another. Don't get me wrong, that's impressive. It's one of the coolest things that humans do. But as we shall see, this runs into some problems. So Clog goes and talks to, Blob, right? And he tells Blob this new idea, and, well, Blob's got it, but then Blob dies. Okay, now what happens to the idea? Now that Blob isn't around to pass on this idea, it's dead. Grog's invention, Grog's idea dies with Blob. No one has it anymore, and we have to start over again. So what we're seeing here is that the idea is running into two boundaries, the boundary of space and the boundary of time. And that slows things down until about 5,000 years ago, when a new technology emerges that allows ideas to transcend the boundaries of space and time. That technology, dear children, is called writing. Now, you might be saying, no, duh, yes, writing, it does things, but writing is magic, kids, if you actually think about it. Because what writing does is it allows us to take those ideas. Here's Tong. Tong has got an idea. Now, he doesn't have to talk to someone else. Tong can write the idea down. Now, this allows him to transcend the first boundary of space, because people who have never met Tong, like Plato here in Greece, can still have access to Tong's ideas, because books travel better than people. Yeah? So Tong can share an idea with Plato here without them ever having met. But even more interesting, this book can transcend time. Because the idea is written down, and books tend to live longer than human beings, even when Plato and Tong die, the ideas don't die with them, because the ideas are preserved in the book. And it can make it to our own time, and we can learn from it ourselves. And because you can make copies of books in ways that you can't make copies of, say, a human mind, we can share those ideas with more people and more people across the ages and across space. This is no small accomplishment, and the impact of this ability for ideas to transcend space and time is massive, absolutely massive. In the 5,000 years after the advent of writing, we come up with new ways of manipulating and measuring and understanding our world, from calendars and compasses to weights and measures and styluses, etc. We also come up with whole new fields of knowledge, from laws and religion and theater to math and art and geometry and, of course, literature. Whole new realms of knowledge are created that didn't exist before. And armed with this new knowledge and these new tools, we start to manipulate our world in ways that we never could have imagined before. From walls and canals and roads and bridges to cities and ships and mills to harness the power of nature. All of these things we did in just 5,000 years based on the ability to transmit knowledge effectively across space and time. Now, compared to 150,000 years, 5,000 years is pretty quick. But by our standards, it's still pretty slow. Like, you're used to getting a new iPhone every 5 minutes. 5,000 years, my goodness. Why? Why was this progress still so slow? Well, there were still some problems with writing. Yes, writing allowed ideas to transcend space and time, but the problem with writing is expensive. Every single letter of every single word has to be handwritten by a human being. And books don't last forever, so they need to be copied on occasion to keep them going. And when people hand copy things, they make mistakes and things get corrupted. And that whole process is incredibly time-consuming and expensive. As a result of all the ideas that people might have had over those 5,000 years, very, very few of them were considered worthy to merit the enormous cost of writing and copying and maintaining books. And because books were so expensive to make, they were very expensive to buy, which means that all of that new knowledge that we're carrying across, that power, only was really available to the rich and powerful. So, why was progress so slow? Well, so few ideas got through, so few people had access to it, and at the end of the day, the people who did have access to it were the rich and powerful. And you might not be surprised by this, but rich and powerful people aren't really big on change, children. They're not usually at the forefront of the progressive movement, because the reason they're rich and powerful is because of the status quo. The way things are. They're not really interested in changing the way things are. Then, just about 500 years ago, a new technology emerged that greatly reduced the cost of generating books. And that, dear children, was printing. Printing allowed way more ideas to get into publication. There was way fewer boundaries to get your ideas published, and because printing was cheap to publish, it was also cheap to buy, which meant that more people had access to books. So, more ideas are getting through to more people. This is called the democratization of information. And it had a massive effect on the world that followed. In the 500 years since printing, the world changed dramatically. First, we had our scientific revolution, a whole new way of understanding and taking apart the world, from Newtonian physics to plutonium. Based on that scientific knowledge, we applied some of it to the human condition, to politics and economics. When we had the Enlightenment, a whole new set of thoughts and ideas about equality and freedom, and about economies and capitalism, communism, all of these things get codified. And then when we apply those ideas to the modern state, we have political revolutions, and the first modern nation states start emerging. Simultaneously, we have an industrial revolution going on. That scientific knowledge can be applied with new tools. So we start with factories and assembly lines and locomotives, and then after we got tired of tapping steam, we started tapping electricity with the second industrial revolution. And we had from light bulbs and bicycles to automobiles, assembly lines, computers, airplanes, spaceships, moon landers. And we could watch all of this development happen because of a simultaneous communication revolution, from the telegraph to the telephone, to the radio, to the television. Think of it this way. In 1609, Galileo was able to look at the moon. And this caused quite a stir, and everyone lost their damn minds. Just because he was able to see the moon. Up close, sort of. Well, in 1969, which is like 360 years later, we landed on the moon. We went from looking at the moon to landing on the moon in 360 years. That's insane. That is a huge transformation of the world. But it didn't stop there. Because about 50 years ago, one more technology came on the scene. One more communication tool that would revolutionize how we share information. And that was the internet. Now you might be thinking, oh yeah, the internet, I know the internet. Kids, the internet is freaking magic. Because all of those boundaries to the sharing of information vanish with the internet. The notion of cost becomes laughably small, right? There's a small marginal cost to printing 1,000 books as opposed to printing one book, right? Paper, mostly. But once it's ready to print, it's ready to print. But with the internet, there's no paper involved. All we're doing is moving electrons around. So when I make a sick cat meme and I put it online, everyone can see it. Whether it's 1 million people or one person, it doesn't matter. All we're doing is briefly inconveniencing electrons, which we've gotten really good at doing, and it's really cheap to do so. So the cost of sharing information is now effectively zero. We can also transcend the boundary of space, because it's that World Wide Web, after all, which means that my sick cat meme is everywhere. Anyone, anywhere in the world can access any knowledge that I might try to create. And I think this is one thing that we don't really appreciate, but the internet has also transcended the boundary of time, because anything that anyone ever thought ever, the entire corpus of human information is now available at our fingertips. You know everything, potentially, that human beings have ever known on your phone. How insane is that? When you look at the technology that came after we were able to share information this effectively, it is pretty mind-blowing. First, we learned new ways of harnessing energy. We also learn new ways to use that energy to, maybe stop destroying the world. Maybe. We'll see. We found new ways to store information and new ways to build things and manipulate our environment. We unlocked the human genome and figured out how life works. And we're on the verge of creating a new form of life. Something that is vastly more intelligent than any of the tools we've used before and potentially more intelligent than us. Imagine, dear kids, look at your phone. I know I always tell you, don't look at your phone. I'm inviting you. Pick up your phone and look at it. What can that phone do? Well, I guess it could make a phone call. I assume some people still use the phone to make a phone call, but mostly we spend it doing social media. You can also watch a movie, play a video game. You could hail a car or navigate the world on your own with satellites telling you where you are from space. You can buy something at the store, you can buy something online, all in a device that you hold in your hand. This is a computer from 50 years ago, kids. It's the size of a house. And it doesn't have a fraction of the processing power of the device that you hold in your hand. That should blow your mind. So, here we are. We have made, as we can see, quite a massive journey. From this modern era, we have gone back in time and seen this huge quest that we did. And we've seen this relationship between knowledge and technology. We can see, as we look across time, that knowledge accelerates technology. Our ability to share information effectively makes technology grow more quickly. Simultaneously, we can also see that technology accelerates the exchange of knowledge. The technology of writing allowed more knowledge to get through. But, of course, there was still the cost problem. So the technology of printing, by reducing that cost, accelerated the exchange of knowledge much further, resulting in all those cool changes that we saw. And, of course, the sharing ability on the internet, the ability to instantaneously share all knowledge without any boundaries, everything from Aristotle to your Uncle Joe, everyone's ideas are equally accessible and shareable across the entire world. That is all due to improved communication technology. So, we see this really fascinating relationship. We see that knowledge accelerates technology, but simultaneously, technology accelerates knowledge. This is called a positive feedback cycle or a positive feedback loop. And it keeps feeding on itself, slowly at first rolling along, and it's been getting faster and faster. Those cycles are getting shorter from 5,000 years of writing and shorter to 500 years of printing and even shorter to 50 years of the internet. So, here we are. We are here. What comes next? Where shall we go from here? What will this world look like? Well, there are some gentlemen who have made it their business to look at, predict, and try to guess what the future will be like. And all of them agree on one point. These clever fellows all point to that we are approaching what they call the singularity. It's just around the bend, dear children. What is it? It's the point at which technology begins to progress on its own, without any human intervention, at an exponential rate, quickly surpassing human intelligence and transforming human life irreversibly. That is the singularity. So what will this post-singularity world look like? Well, it's hard to tell. Ray Kurzweil notes that it's almost impossible for us to imagine. Think of it this way. If you took your fancy phone, right, and you had a time machine, and you jumped through a portal and went back just 50 years ago and showed them what your phone can do, their minds would be blown. They'd be like, oh, this is not possible. Their heads would explode. They could not begin to process it. It would be outside the realm of their imagination. They might have some point of reference, but their point of reference is house-sized computers, not handheld mega devices. Let's just go back another communication technology ago. Let's look at the world before printing, right? And the world after it. If dear Lance Armstrong from our printing world were to go back in time and talk to Galileo and tell him about what the moon is like, they would have no frame of reference for what he's talking about. He would be an angel or a demon. Their heads would explode. They would have no way of making sense of the world that he was trying to describe to them. Similarly, if Tang, our person from his literate world, were to go back in time and try to explain that world to Grog, our wonderful caveman, and try to explain the world of civilization and literature with walls and roads and villages and towns and commerce and all of this stuff, Grog would be utterly lost. He wouldn't know what Tang was talking about. 90% of the nouns would be words that Grog has never heard. He'd have no frame of reference to understand that world. So, when we put this in reverse, oh yes, and his head would explode. When we put this in reverse, we realize that if we were to ask these people, someone before the age of writing, what will the world be like after writing? Well, first of all, he doesn't know, right? He cannot even know what writing is, let alone any of those big changes that came afterwards. He wouldn't be able to imagine them. And if we ask someone from the age of writing what the world would be like after printing, he'd have no idea. He could not possibly imagine the world to come. And even if we asked our dear friend Einstein, who was a very clever guy, to predict what the world would be like with the instantaneous sharing of information made possible by the internet, he could not possibly imagine that world. And that brings us to you. We are in the same situation as the caveman, as our literate friend Tang, as even clever old Einstein. When this singularity comes, when the transformation ahead of us is here, we have no way to anticipate or imagine what that world will be like. We cannot even begin to wrap our heads around it. Will AI solve all of our world's problems? Will we eradicate hunger and disease and all of these problems? Or will we blow ourselves up? At the end of the day, it's up to you, kids. You are here. You decide what the future will look like.